Hello, and thank you for having me in this space. I'm really glad, I'm really flattered that I was accepted into having this little talk about something maybe more personal, but I hope it is of interest to many of you. My name is Luis Leon. I am a game designer and narrative designer from Mexico, and the name of the talk is Falling in and Out of Love and in again with game development. The subtitle, as you can see, is A Tale of Hope, Uncertainty, and Reality. And basically, what I'm going to be talking about today is about the expectations I had going into the games industry as a student, how I chose a career in game design, what I wanted my life to be like, how it is ending up being as of right now, and how I came into basically I got stamped into a wall because of the very high expectations I had from social media and other sources such as documentaries. Very well, let's get started. So, yeah, this is going to be somewhat personal, and as such, I will be talking first and foremost about how I fell in love with games. And when I was much younger, when I started playing a lot of video games, mainly Nintendo games, I loved Super Mario 64, games like Pokemon, and other games in my PlayStation 2, but mainly Nintendo games. I didn't have a lot of access to more, let's say, mature games. And when I once I visited a cousin of mine who was playing Assassin's Creed and Uncharted, and I was very awestruck by this. I was like, "What? Can you make games like set in these kinds of settings?" Which was like really shocking news to me because for me games were like just fantasy or Nintendo games, and this was more like a movie. And I got pretty interested in all of this. I was very interested in film since I was very young, so I started seeing a lot of parallels between these types of games and the movies I tried to watch. I liked to watch, and that's how eventually I discovered games like indie games such as Papers Please, Hotline Miami, or Journey, which really struck a chord with me. These games really inspired me, but most of all, what really inspired me, besides from the games themselves, which I really liked when I played them, like I was 12 years old by this time, uh, was games analysis and game reviews and all of that. I read a lot of English speaking materials such as Killscreen, YouTube channels such as Super Bunny Hop, and of course Spanish speaking channels mainly from Spain like mundogamers.com and a YouTube channel called DayoScript. This really shaped the way I saw video games, and I wanted all of this in conjunction made me say, wow, I really want to make games. But if I can attribute one material to the way I wanted my, let's say, my life to be like, or my expectations going to the games industry, was Indie Game the Movie. This documentary, which, well, nowadays there are people who say, very rightly so, that this is a very outdated look to the games industry, to the indie space. But at the time, it really inspired me. Very ironically, because it's a documentary where the developers are mostly suffering all the way through. But it made me realize, like, wow, I can totally make this. I can get in my basement or something and start making games, and I can really see them as art projects in some sort of way. And I discovered venues such as the Independent Games Festival, which validated these types of games. And I saw, like, well, maybe I can make an indie game with maybe myself or maybe with one or two people I meet along the way, and eventually, I don't know, win awards or something. But, well, at that time, I really saw game development as something far off. I knew I wanted to be making video games, but at that time I was somewhat intimidated. But most of all, what I really was interested in was games analysis and criticism and writing opinions. And by this time, I was like 14, 15 years old, and I started writing a lot of game reviews and analysis in forums or like in private blogs, personal blogs. I started meeting a lot of people this way, and they started inviting me into certain spaces. There is this webpage called Game Elegant, which is cut off because of my camera. It's a Spanish website in which I wrote like 1 year or so. And I started a YouTube channel called Postmortem Videojuegos, which is a very bad name. I realize it by now. But it was dedicated to games analysis as well, trying to make the most out of what drew me into games in the first place, which was trying to get to the bottom of what made games tickle, if you can say it that way. I was really drawn into game narratives, and I really wanted to explore that types of themes and topics. And my guess, all of my thinking process was, if I know to analyze games, then I will know how to make games. Which resulted kind of true, but not 100% accurate. Anyways, by that time, I also was very curious about, well, where are all of the Mexican video games? And I started digging around, and I did find a lot of Mexican games, which, I saw many games that were being successful, that had been successful, but I felt like pretty isolated in some sort of way. I felt too far removed from all of that because I didn't see the types of games I wanted to make. And I said that, like, well, maybe here in my own country I won't be able to create the types of games I want. Maybe I will move somewhere else. I don't know. Or maybe I will meet someone down the way that will connect with me in the types of games we want to make, and we will start creating like very pretentious games like the ones I wanted to make, like very narrative driven games. Anyways, I saw all of this, and I also saw that there were there were very few credits of people as game designers. And this was like very shocking to me because I said, well, I do want to be a game designer, but I see a lot of game programmers or game producers, and that's not exactly what I want. Again, this was how I saw it back then, like when I was a teenager. And so I was more inclined to, well, maybe I will stick more to games criticism or maybe games analysis. But still, I pushed forward because I always ended up saying, no, I want to create video games and I want to be a game designer. Because when I saw the types of people that inspired me, well, they were game designers. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be in charge of the rules of the game, like being in charge of determining how narrative systems maybe would be in touch with the players and all of that. And I wouldn't settle for anything else. And it's very curious because, well, as you may know, many famous game designers obviously didn't study game design, and because back then it was a very brand new field that was still being carved out, especially towards video games. So of course, me studying video game design is an obvious result of living in the 21st century, of having to study something back in 2018 and having the option to study something like this. So I went to a college called, well, it's not a college, it's a university. Maybe there's some missing translation here, SAI Institute, where I studied a game design degree. And this was very important to me. At least back then, it was the only school that in Mexico, or at least near me, that had something like a game design degree. Everything else was like games programming or games development or engineering or games engineering, arts for games or 3D art. a lot of sideways paths to the thing I really wanted to create, or the thing I really wanted to be. So when I entered the game design degree, I was met with a lot of things that threw me off at first, that made me again question like, what am I doing here? Maybe this isn't really what I want. Maybe I want to be like more in the field of game studies or games criticism again. And there were a lot of teachers that I really appreciated back in university that were from the field of game studies. And actually, like, I was doubting myself, like, should I really be creating games? Because I wanted to be a game designer. And again, a game designer is like, it's not usually like a position someone can enter from a very early stage, or it's not very common at least. It's more common to have an entry level job such as a 3D modeler or a games artist or a games programmer. And even still nowadays, there are, at least here in my context, very few job openings for game designers. And I was starting to lose hope in what I wanted. And I was starting to resign myself to saying, well, maybe I will have like a very entry level job somewhere I don't even like it there, as a games artist, maybe games programmer, which I'm not saying they're bad positions or bad jobs. I think it's really amazing, and obviously they are part of a team, but that's not what I wanted to be making. So, anyways, there came a time I could prove myself. Well, before this, I was making a lot of indie game projects in itch.io. And well, I was starting to create a lot of things by my own self, by my own account, because at school we were taught a lot of things about game design, but it was mostly directed towards, well, you can mostly be a 3D modeler because that's the thing that will get you a job. But I was like, no, I want to create my own games. I want to be like this sort of, again, this indie rock star, maybe. Like, I create my own games from scratch, or maybe I have one or two collaborators where we can do all of the game by ourselves. But, anyways, we had to make a thesis project, which in my case was this game called The Wandering. I created it with a partner called Yael. He helped me with the 3D art, but I was mostly in charge of, well, the games programming, the to the art. I wrote the story. I did the design for all of it. I was like living my dream by making this game, and I even said to myself, well, finally I'm making the types of games I want to make, the way I want to make them. And of course, this is going to catapult me into something much more bigger. And I'm going to send this game to win awards. And it's going to become big, and people are going to notice me. But how are people going to notice you if you suck at marketing, right? So, yes, I did send this game to some festivals. It didn't get a response, but people were liking it. Like, maybe close people or people not so close, they played it and said, oh, it's nice, but nothing more like than that. But it was enough to make me like have an existential crisis, right? I was saying, no, what am I doing? What am I doing creating these types of games? Of course, like all of those stories in the game, the movie. Of course, I had a very different way of seeing things after having studied for 3 years. And I realized, well, that was like 10 years ago. Like, in the game, the movie, of course, things are going to be different right now. How am I going to become the type of person I want? Like, again, I was very resigned, and I felt pretty isolated. I felt like no one could understand me, like very edgy maybe, but that's the truth. I felt like pretty isolated. I said, I'm not finding myself in this industry as I would have wanted to be. I felt there were like a lot of groups in the industry, that had like very different visions for game development, which is very fine and it's very healthy. But I struggled. I said I feel I'm a very independent person. I feel like I have a pretty different vision for what I want to make, and I was struggling to find people. I said, oh, maybe I could make something with them. Anyways, the pandemic also struck when I was in all of this process. The game The Wandering was actually finished during the pandemic, and all of this contributed to me feeling pretty down. I felt like a jigsaw piece out of place. I didn't fit in anywhere, and it was very heartbreaking because all of my life I said, well, I can't wait to get to a game design degree because there I will meet people that are like me and that share my vision. And when I got there, I didn't find a lot of people who I thought shared my vision, which then I later realized was actually a good thing, because it's a good thing that there are many types of ways of seeing the same objects, which are video games, right? The same media. But I was pretty much in a very low level in my life, and again I said, well, that's how I fell out of love with games, and I was also considering dedicating my life to another thing. And I was saying, well, I have spent almost all of my life to this, to get to this point, and now what am I going to do? I don't have a place to go. I don't fit in, basically. But time went on. I mean, this thing was like a process of 1 year or 2 years. I still kept on going, making the games I wanted to make, like in my personal time, in my free time. But I also got to work in some studios. First, well, I had to do my professional practices in a game studio, which makes mobile games. And this gave me a whole new perspective. I mean, I wasn't like very fulfilled working there, but I got to practice my game design skills, and I got to realize, well, I can create games like other types of games that can also help me get to see games in a new way, in a different way. I'm also working. Or I got to work in this other studio, which, well, we're working in a private game for a company. I cannot say a lot about it, but again, while I'm making this, I can also make the types of games I want. And I started, well, juggling these two things, and I got to say, well, maybe I'm not going to live like the super indie rockstar fantasy of getting famous from night to day or day to night, right? But I can make a living out of this, and it's not bad. And well, here is my current job. I'm working right now in a game called Hana. And why am I placing this message here? Making video games is in social media. Well, because working here, this is my current job again, made me realize that there are a lot of things that aren't in social media, and that they can paint a picture, maybe a wrong picture of expectations and what you can actually find out there. I didn't know anything about this studio, and I'm working right now in a narrative game in a game design position. And well, I mean, this could be another talk entirely, about how social media can mold our way of seeing the world. But this is also to talk about how, well, games are really a very big medium, and there are a lot of companies out there, a lot of people creating them, a lot of visions out there, and you can learn a lot about from them. And yes, this is maybe a very simple statement, but it really took me a lot to get there. And I really thank the people I've worked with for making me get to that point. And well, and there have also been other things that have happened since then. I'm still creating in my spare time some games, like the types of games I want to create, like very based on text. And there have also been people that have really well that have told me that the things I make have struck a chord with them. There is this message here in the bottom left corner. Someone told me that a game that I made, uh, well, they played it in a philosophy class, and many students like were very inspired by this game, and they got to talk about their personal experiences with relationships, and it made me really happy because that's something I really wanted to make. And maybe I'm not out there like winning prizes or awards or anything, but at the end of the day, I see this like one of my biggest achievements. Like I wanted to create video games that made people think about these types of things, and seeing a game that I made like being used in this way is something that has really made me really proud. And I got to realize with with these types of comments, and by giving talks like this, that there are people that have a resonance with the things that I make and the things that I say. I'm not that isolated as I thought I was, and I also got to realize that I can make my own way in the games industry, that it doesn't depend on belonging to one group or another, or sending games to certain festivals or groups, or like you can take whatever you need from all of these places and build your own way. Like that song, Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac. Well, that was like parenthesis. And I also got to be recently in Pixelat, in a festival here in Mexico, talking about The Wandering, that game I mentioned. And again, a lot of people approached me and told me, hey, what you talked about is something I live through every day. And maybe when I was a teenager, I would have said, no, you don't know anything about what I'm living through. But, well, as I've grown a little more older, I've realized, well, a lot of people uh, go through very similar things because that's just what it means to live, right? So that's how that's how I fell in love with games development again, by realizing that my life doesn't have to follow a blueprint, that my life isn't a documentary or a movie, it's my life. And I realized if I truly do the things I like, there are people who will like them or who will call me because they like the things that I make, and maybe I won't always be working on the things I truly want to make, but that's just like what life is about, confronting new things and approaching new challenges and overcoming them just like you would in a video game. And that's it. That was this brief talk. Here my web pages, my social media. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to clarify that my web page is in Spanish, but there it is my itch.page, well, my itch.io page. You can find a lot of things, a lot of games in English, and also somewhere out there, it's my you can find my email, and you can email me, and I will answer back in English. You can also find my Twitter. You can follow me. I tweet in Spanish like 99.99% of the time. But if you send me a message in English, I will answer back. Or in Spanish. I don't know if some of you know the beautiful language of Spanish. So anyways, that's it. And thank you very much. And I will see you pretty soon, maybe in another place and another time. Goodbye.